and welcome to the 5th of 12 EMOS webinars. My name is Mojca Baudaš. I come from the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia, where this session is hosted. Today, I'll also act as a facilitator. Let me first explain for any newcomers that EMOS stands for the European Master in Official Statistics, a joint project of universities and data producers in the EU member states, EFTA and EU candidate countries. The network that now comprises 23 master programs in 15 countries is expected to grow soon, as the third call for applications is about to be launched in March. And this call will first be presented at the 6th EMOS workshop next week in Ljubljana. Now, let me briefly explain how we run the webinar today. As a participant, you can watch and listen to the session. To interact with the presenters, you can use the chat window on the right, where many of you already said hi. We encourage you to post questions here throughout the webinar, and the presenters will respond during several question breaks. Now, should you have any technical difficulty, please first try restarting the Adobe Connect or the computer. This usually solves most of the problems. And now to the topic of today's webinar, Statistical Monitoring of Sustainable Development. Today, I have a great pleasure to host two colleagues from two different places, Nicola Massarelli from Eurostat, hi, and Monika Gorzelak from Statistics Poland, hi. We will first start with Nicola, that will introduce the topic and present global and EU monitoring, and continue with Monika, that will present the case of Poland. Now, Nicola has been working in official statistics for 20 years. He started his career in ISTAT, the Italian National Statistical Institute, and in 2007, he moved to Eurostat. He has worked for many years in the field of labor market statistics. He currently leads Eurostat Europe 2020 and Sustainable Development Indicators team, which is in charge of monitoring progress towards the EU long-term policy initiatives and strategies. His team also carries out methodological work on indicator use for policy making. Okay, now let's move to Nicola's presentation. Dear Nicola, please, the floor is yours.
And thank you very much.
Yes, we will, the rest of us will pause the video so that you get all the attention.
Thank you very much, Mojca. Welcome to everyone. Thank you for the nice presentation. So I directly enter into the subject of my presentation. It is structured in 3 parts. I will start with an introduction, a conceptual introduction of what is sustainable development for those who are not so familiar with it. I will then speak about monitoring the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. You may or may have not heard about it. And I will finish with the activities in which Eurostat is mainly involved about monitoring the Sustainable Development Goals in an EU context. But to break the ice and to start with, I would like to ask you to describe sustainable development using either 3 key words or 1 sentence.
Yes, and please just put your answers in the chat box, okay? So we can already see that people started typing. So use the chat box to provide your answer. Nicola will wait a few moments to see.
Okay. I see that there are two answers I see.
Yes.
You have the three now, have many more are typing, which is good. I will wait, yes, a few seconds more. So I see first answer is sustainable development is measured and finite growth or enduring development, economic growth without compromising the environment, climate action, quality education, economic growth. So this answer is already actually take into account or get the main essence of sustainable development or some key elements of it. I think, thank you. You can continue typing, of course. I will move on the presentation and try to answer from my perspective or from a more official perspective. The definition which is in this slide is the one which is most commonly known, used, and referred to. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. There are several different possible definitions of sustainable development, but this is the best known one, and it was formulated in 1987 in the so-called Brundtland Report. This report, called Our Common Future, is the final report of the World Commission on Environment and Development of the United Nations, and it is called Brundtland Report. It is known as Brundtland Report because Mrs. Brundtland was at that time the chair of this commission and the Prime Minister of Norway. This report is very important because for the first time it linked expectations on well-being and economic growth with respect of the environment and the preservation of natural resources. So you have highlighted in your answers several aspects of sustainable development, so it is clear now that sustainable development is multidimensional. Elaborating or schematizing the definition which I have just presented, sustainable development is about meeting the needs of the current generations in a given place. This is the here and now dimension, taking into account that what we do now and in a given place has spillover effects on other places of the world. This is the elsewhere dimension, and on the future generations. This is the later dimension. Another way of seeing the multidimensional aspect of sustainable development is considering that it encompasses all the main spheres of human life. So striving for sustainable development means striving for social solidarity, economic efficiency, and environmental responsibility at the same time. And there is a fourth dimension which is also crucial to achieve all this, which is the institutional dimension. The institutional setting is key to be able to achieve any sustainable development goal. There is a broad consensus on the dimensions which I have just presented. At the same time, there are many ways to then decline sustainable development in a more detailed way. Here there are just three examples. There are more, of course. We will see more in detail the 2030 agenda later. It declines sustainable development along 17 goals. there is an initiative carried out by the Conference of European Statisticians under the supervision of or under the organization of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the UN-ECE. The Conference of European Statisticians released a conceptual framework to monitor sustainable development, which included 20 themes. And then the European Union in 2001 developed and approved an EU Sustainable Development Strategy. And the monitoring framework that the Eurostat has developed and used to monitor it encompasses 10 different themes. I have mentioned the Brundtland Report 1987 and the 2030 Agenda, which is 2015. But in this time span of 28 years, the concept of sustainable development has developed, and many different related initiatives have taken place. And here, this slide shows the key milestones that have taken place during this time. So after the Brundtland Report, another keystone is the so-called Rio Earth Summit, which took place in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. The outcome of this Rio Earth Summit was the so-called Rio Declaration, which contained 27 principles of sustainable development. A second milestone on the way to sustainable development are the so-called Millennium Development Goals. This is a UN agenda launched in 2000 and up to 2015, mainly addressed to or exclusively addressed to developing countries. It included 8 goals to meet the needs of the world's poorest, and in particular to eradicate extreme poverty. 20 years after the Rio Earth Summit took place the so-called Rio +20 Summit. This was another UN initiative, and it is important because in Rio in 2012 it was decided to launch a process to develop a set of sustainable development goals. So that was the start of the process, which then led to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And now we enter into the second part of the presentation, which is the 2030 Agenda, and I would like to know from you what is your level of knowledge. We have a poll here, if our host can put it on screen.
Yes.
Please.
Yes, we will invite now people to cast their votes. Do you know this agenda or not? Just to help Nicola understand his public. And Nicola, whenever you want, you can click the broadcast results so that also the participants can see them.
Okay, good.
Because now the participants don't see the results, and it may be interesting.
Should I do it? They see.
Yes, okay. You can do it. I think that most of people voted, although some also.
So, the numbers are still continuously updating, but I see that there is a large majority which has heard about it. There are a few experts and also a few who have never heard about it.
Yeah.
So I think that we can conclude along these lines.
Oh, okay.
Maybe we can stop it here.
Okay, we will end the poll and now return to the presentation.
Thank you all who voted. So I enter now into the 2030 Agenda. As I mentioned before, this is the main difference between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals is that the former referred to the developing countries, so to only one part of the world, while the Sustainable Development Goals apply and commit all the countries of the world. The 2030 Agenda was adopted on 25 September 2015 by a dedicated UN Summit on Sustainable Development, and all countries of the world committed to implement all the goals and targets by 2030. At the heart of this agenda are 17 goals, which are declined into 169 very detailed and quite often multidimensional targets, meaning targets which include several different aspects. The agenda also foresees a regular follow-up and review of progress towards its implementation, meaning that the policymakers want to know how well they are doing in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The motto of the 2030 Agenda is "Leave no one behind." This means that the agenda, the policymakers, when implementing the agenda, should look at all the subpopulations within their own countries, in particular the most disadvantaged. And the poorest, the ones which live in the worst conditions. So this is a key feature of the agenda, which poses specific problems to the monitoring exercise in which we are involved. This slide presents an overview of the goals and targets. As you can see, the number of the blue boxes, the blue and gray boxes are the targets which are associated to the 17 SDGs. As you can see, each goal has a different number of targets, but the thing I want to highlight here is that the agenda foresees two different kinds of targets. There are 107 substantive targets, which are targets which basically ask to achieve some concrete results. I make an example. Target 1.4, by 2030, ensure that all men and women, in particular the poor and the vulnerable, have equal rights to economic resources, etc., etc. Because the text of the target is much longer. And then there are the gray targets or the pale blue targets. These are 62, which are so-called means of implementation. It means basically these targets ask the countries to ensure that the necessary resources are put in place to achieve the substantive targets. I make an example. Target 1A states, ensure significant mobilization of resources in order to provide adequate and predictable means for developing countries to implement programs and policies to end poverty in all its dimensions. So there are quite a lot of this means of implementation among the targets of the 2030 Agenda. Now I enter into the, yes, there is still this slide. The targets I mentioned before have look at many different aspects, very often are multidimensional, and there is no one-to-one correspondence between the targets and the goal they are attached to, meaning that several elements of several targets refer to different goals. Basically, all the SDGs are interlinked. There are many links between different goals, and the slide here in a certain way highlights that most of the goals you see, this is the slide I showed before, and with the addition of the SDGs on them. And most of the goals do not just belong to one of the three spheres, but belong to more than one. And if we put the targets instead of the goals, this picture would become even more intricate. Now I move to the monitoring part. There are different levels of SDG monitoring. This is foreseen by the 2030 agenda. The main actors to implement the agenda are the countries, and so also the national monitoring is the crucial part of monitoring for the 2030 agenda. Other levels, key level, are the global level, and this exercise is mainly carried out by the UN system, that is the UN Statistics Division and the other UN thematic agencies. A regional level, which means regional in the sense of the UN regions. So for Europe is the UN Economic Commission for Europe. And then it is foreseen to also have a thematic monitoring for specific topics or individual goals. And then there are many more other monitoring exercises and actors who carry out monitoring. For instance, NGOs, think tanks, and so on and so forth. And each of them produce indicator sets and monitoring reports. But sticking to the official monitoring levels, the first monitoring reports have been produced since the agenda entered into force at the beginning of 2016. And in 2017, for instance, at global level, the United Nations have produced the 2017 SDG report. It includes about 100 indicators at the moment, even if the global indicator set includes 244. I will say a few more in a minute. And at EU level, Eurostat has released the first USG Monitoring Package in November 2017, based on a dedicated indicator set. And at national level, countries are also reporting on national strategies based on national indicator sets. A few words on the global monitoring. This slide shows the main actors. So the body which supervises the global monitoring is the UN Statistical Commission, which is the main statistical body at world level. It is participated by the statistical offices of all countries of the world, and it mandates expert groups, technical groups to actually carry out the work, and reviews and approves the work that these technical groups have done. The interagency and expert group on SDG indicators is the technical group mandated by the Statistical Commission to develop a global indicator framework for the SDGs, and this was actually done in 2015 and 2016, and finally in 2017 this global indicator framework has been officially approved by UN resolution, and the interagency and expert group is now working on fully implementing this indicator framework. Third group of important actors are the so-called custodian agencies. These are mainly UN thematic agencies such as the International Labour Organization, UNESCO, FAO, WHO, etc. So these agencies are responsible for data collection of the indicators, of the global indicators which are in their sphere of interest. So, for instance, food or agricultural indicators are attached to FAO, labor market indicators are attached to ILO, and so on and so forth. And then there is the political level, which are the ECOSOC. ECOSOC stands for UN Economic and Social Council. It's a political body, and the highest political body at UN level is the General Assembly, which give the political endorsement to the work of the statisticians. I just mentioned the resolution by which the General Assembly adopted the Global Indicator Framework. This global indicator framework, which I've mentioned several times, it includes 244 indicators, of which 2032 different ones, because 9 are used to monitor more than one target. Not all of these indicators are already available and ready to use. Actually, at the moment, only 40% have an agreed internationally agreed methodology and have data for a wide range of countries. For 28%, there is an agreed methodology, but data availability is limited. Only less than half of the countries in the world have data on them. And then there is a third group, which are the so-called tier 3 indicators, on which methodological work still needs to be finalized. Basically, these are placeholders in the indicator set. Why does the indicator set, the UN indicator set, includes placeholder? Because the mandate from the political level, from the 2030 agenda, is that the monitoring should concern all the 169 targets in all their aspects. This means that indicators had to be conceived and included in the indicator set for all the targets, and in many cases no indicators existed. So this means that some development work still has to be done.
Okay, Nicola, we have 2 questions from our participants. You can look also in the chat window. First, how are trade-offs between targets made?
Yes, well, this is a question which pertains more to the political than the statistical level. Nevertheless, you're perfectly right. The different targets are related, and achieving or pursuing one target may have negative effects on other targets. This is the art of the policymakers to find the right balance, to assign priorities and find good recipes to possibly prevent these trade-offs or to minimize them. But the issue is definitely there, and I don't have the solution to that.
Okay, and one more specific question. Do these goals and targets include provisions for curbing, reducing, or limiting CO2 emissions?
Only to a limited extent. CO2 emissions, as far as I remember, are only mentioned in the context of CO2 emissions from agriculture. And this is deliberate because in parallel to defining the 2030 agenda, there was another process ongoing on climate change action. And CO2 emissions are strictly related, let's say, much more related to climate change action. So there was, it was deliberate not to, let's say, have a competition between the two agendas, and so objectives on curbing CO2 emissions have been reserved for the climate change agenda instead, and they are not explicitly included or not prominently in the 2030 agenda.
Okay, we have one more question. Maybe we can take it, but then we have to hurry up. You can see for goal 1 is the definition for poverty for MDG and SDG the same, and for goal 2 regarding hunger, how is this measured?
There are several definitions of poverty in the 2030 agenda. One definition is extreme poverty, and the extreme poverty is related to people earning at least a minimum amount per day. This amount changes. In the past, it was €1, $1, sorry. Then it moved up to I think 1.5, and now the new limit is $1.9 per day. These are thresholds set by the World Bank. So I think the current limit is $1.9, and this has changed between the MDGs and the SDGs. And then there is a relative definition of poverty, that is poverty or a risk of poverty. These are the definitions which we use in Europe, normally in the developed countries. So the definition of poverty we use is people are at risk of poverty if their income is below 60% of the median income of people living in the same country. So it's a different way of measuring it. And the 2030 agenda, in any case, makes reference to the absolute definition of poverty and to relative definition of poverty according to national definitions. So this relative definition may change in different parts of the world. I will move forward now, in case take other questions later. I am already behind schedule, sorry.
Yeah, okay, let's move on.
So I was speaking about this tier classification on the indicators. There are these three groups, and the big challenge now is mainly developing the so-called tier 3 indicators. Work is ongoing, and the custodian agencies, which we've seen in the previous slide, are mainly responsible for this methodological work, this methodological development. We, Eurostat, is involved. We are supporting a few of these work streams. And this work is overseen by the Interagency and Expert Group on SDGs, which regularly updates this tier classification. So this is the latest situation. And now I enter into the third part of my presentation. I'm really behind schedule, I see. What we do in Eurostat, what we do at the EU level. So the European Union has very actively contributed to the formulation of the 2030 agenda. So sustainable development is at the heart of European policy since a long time. And now the European Union, all the institutions of the European Union and the European Commission are committed to support the implementation of the 2030 agenda. And at the end of 2016, in November, the European Commission released the first policy document on the SDGs. It was a Commission communication called Next Steps for Sustainable European Future, which outlines the EU answer to the 2030 agenda and shows how the existing EU policies contribute to achieve the SDGs. And this document also includes a cue on monitoring, which basically says that the European Commission should regularly, which means annually, monitor EU progress towards the 2030 agenda and develop a reference indicator framework for this purpose. So first step, Eurostat coordinated the development of such an indicator framework, and the indicators have been chosen for their policy relevance and the statistical quality. The indicators included in this EU SDG indicator set are all already existing indicators. So this is a major difference from the UN indicator set, which has a lot of placeholders we have just seen. So we have only considered indicators which are ready to use for a monitoring report. This indicator set is the result of a broad consultative process, which included member states via the national statistical institutes, EU Council committees, users, associations of users, academia, civil society, international organizations, etc. And this indicator set was approved by the European Statistical System Committee, which is the highest statistical body in the European Union. And this on 18 May 2017. Main features of this indicator set, it includes 100 different indicators, which are evenly distributed across the 17 goals. So the indicator set attaches the same importance to all the goals. 41 of the 100 indicators are multi-purpose, meaning that they are used to monitor more than one goals. This allows to highlight the links between the different goals. 32% of the USDG indicators come from sources external to the European statistical system. This because several aspects in the covered by the SDGs are currently not covered by or not yet covered by official statistics. So we had to enlarge our view and look also outside what we normally produce and disseminate. Of course, quality criteria, we looked at the quality criteria, and they had to be met for an external indicator to be included. This indicator, the USDG indicator set, is attached to EU policy initiatives, which contribute to the fulfillment of the SDGs. This is important because the background of our indicator set is not directly the goals and targets of the 2030 agenda, but are the EU policy initiatives which contribute to it. And despite this different background, there is still quite a good alignment between the two indicator sets, given that 56% of our indicators are also part of the UN global indicator set. We carry out regular annual monitoring, and for this we need indicators which are annually updated. This is the case for almost 90% of them, but 12% are updated with a lower frequency. And then I come back to the motto, leave no one behind. This entails presenting the indicators for as many breakdowns as possible. And as you can see, whenever data are available, we present, we break the indicators down by gender, age groups, regional level, educational attainment, degree of urbanization, income, and disability. In 2017, Eurostat has released the first USDG monitoring package, which includes several different products. On the top left, you see the covers of two paper publications. The blue one is a standard statistical book, I would say a 400 pages monitoring report. And the gray cover is instead a short brochure conveying in a visual way the main messages of the monitoring report. We have developed a brand new dedicated website, which you see in the middle of the slide, a collection of wiki-style articles in the so-called Statistics Explained section of Eurostat's website. And of course, all the data of the USDG indicator sets are online in Eurostat's database. When you download the slides, all the icons in this slide have links, so you can directly access the different products in the monitoring package. We are strict with time, so maybe I wanted to show you a couple of features of the website. I asked Moisa if we still have a couple of minutes for that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you then.
Try sharing your screen. Don't forget to select application, please.
Okay.
And full screen for participants.
Okay. Okay. So this is Eurostat's dedicated section to sustainable development. This is the entry page where you have direct access to the different products I just mentioned, publications, key findings. Here you find the data, statistics explained, etc. I want to show you the key findings. Here, if you click on read more, you see a picture which gives the overview of how the EU has progressed along the SDGs in the last 5 years. So progress has been faster for some goals and less fast for other ones. And then I would like to show you the SDG wheel, which we have developed. Here you can click on the different icons. For instance, I click on the first one. This is SDG 1, which is about eradicating poverty. Here you see on the table on the right side, you can see the indicators which are included, which we included under Goal 1. In the wheel, you see a needle. The needle points to an upward diagonal green arrow, which means that the EU made moderate progress towards the Sustainable Development Objectives in the last 5 years. And this is the result of it is of the average of the trends observed for the different indicators. So you see in the field of poverty, we had some positive developments and some movements away from the Sustainable Development Objectives, and the positive movements slightly prevail. And this is why we reach this average result. And if you click on the different icons, you can see the aggregated assessment here in the needle, in the middle of the wheel, and the evaluation for the individual indicators in the table on the right side. For a few goals, for 4 goals, we did not provide an aggregated evaluation because an evaluation is missing for a substantial number of indicators under that goal, and then in those cases we preferred not to base an average on too few indicators. Look here, for instance, on SDG 14. This is because for some indicators we do not have long enough time series. There is one more feature I want to show you. If you click on indicators, so what I've shown you are the key findings of the monitoring report. So that's the situation frozen to 2017. But if you go to the indicators part, you have this entry page, and if you click on each icon of an SDG, you can see the latest developments. The data here are updated to the last available years. So if new data points have become available in the meantime, they are shown in these charts. Here you can add countries. I click at random here to the chart, and you can compare several countries, the trends of several countries for the different indicators. And here at the bottom, you see the icons of the different indicators which are included, which under in this case under goal 1. And then you can easily go back to the menu and click on another SDG and do the same. We can go back to the slides. Thanks.
Yes, we have to wrap up.
Yes, very quickly. So this is how the brochure looks internally. This is my last slide. It's about next steps. So at the moment we are reviewing the USDG indicator set to make sure that also in 2018 it includes the most relevant and highest quality indicators. And we are also looking for possibilities to further align it to the UN global indicators. The process will finish in March, and we will probably include a few different indicators which for which there has been methodological development of or new data availability during the last year. And we foresee to publish the next USDG monitoring report in September this year, 2018. So this is it from my side. So thank you for your attention. These are my contacts.
Thank you, Nicola, for this great overview. Now we will just pause for a few seconds to stop and restart the recording. This is just a technical matter. And now we will continue with Monika Gorzelak and the case of Poland. Now, Monika is a senior statistician in the Silesian Center for Regional Surveys in the Statistical Office in Katowice, which is one of 16 regional statistical offices in Poland. Her responsibility is, among other tasks, methodological and analytical work, as well as development and maintenance of databases in the area of sustainable development indicators on the national level. Now, Monika is involved in both of these activities. She is also a member of the analytical team of sustainable development under the auspices of Statistics Poland. And I think that in 2 weeks' time, our presenters will meet in person because Monika will be attending the meeting of Working Group on Sustainable Development and Europe 2020 indicators at Eurostat. Now, please, dear Monika, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Moisa, for a nice introduction. So, by way of introduction to the topic of the second part of today's webinar, I'd like to emphasize that due to inevitable time constraints and for the sake of clarity, my presentation is just a summary of monitoring process of sustainable development in Poland. Therefore, if you happen to be interested in the details of it, I'll be delighted to answer your questions in the meantime and afterwards. And well, so the first part of my presentation is concerned with Sustainable Development Indicator Set, or SDI set for Poland, and is a bit theoretical, whereas the second one, more practical, is concerned with the strategy for disseminating Polish SDI set. Namely, I'm going to present some basic features of SDI application, which is a publicly available tool. It seems the timing for presenting Polish SDI set makes it quite thrilling, as the set is currently being transformed due to the adoption of the 2030 agenda. Therefore, firstly, I'll outline the set before the agenda, which will involve its genesis, conceptual foundation, selection criteria, and grouping method. And then I'll proceed to the set after the agenda, and I'll discuss some major changes it is undergoing and its new frame of reference. So the first actions towards the development of a system for monitoring sustainable development in Poland were performed from 2009 up to 2011 within the grant agreement resulting from the project, and the grant agreement was signed between the European Commission and Statistics Poland. The project was called Support for the Development of Indicator Sets for Monitoring National Sustainable Development Strategies, Developing and Implementing a Polish Set of Sustainable Development Indicators. And now I have a question for you concerning the project, namely, what do you think was the biggest challenge to the project? And I'd like you to share your answers in the chat pod. Try to think of your own experience with project work, with teamwork, and I'd be grateful for your ideas. I can see that a few people are typing. Visualization tools, you say, to disseminate indicators. Yes, it was quite problematic, but only later. Now I'm asking you about the very concept of the set.
Yes, Daniel referred to visualizations in Eurostat. Monika,
Okay.
I will just ask you if you can take the microphone a little bit further away from.
Is that better?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Any other thoughts that you can participate?
Data sharing.
Yes.
I can see data sharing among organizations, right? So collecting data, in fact, was quite problematic. But it was only later. It was the further stage of SDI set development, because in fact, the biggest challenge or the biggest problem was that there was no separate national sustainable development strategy in Poland at that time, and by implication, no national SDGs. And what do you think was the solution? What would you do in such a situation? So no sustainable development strategy, no sustainable development goals, and urgent need to monitor sustainable development. How would you solve that obstacle? Please do share your ideas in the chat pod if you have any. So I'll keep silent for a moment, hopefully waiting for your answers. I can see that 2 or 3 people are typing, right? Study the experiences from other countries. Precisely, that's in fact, that was the solution. So the lack of sustainable development strategy and goals was solved by referring to EU and Polish strategic documents related to sustainable development, and which resulted in the final identification of Polish SDGs. And the EU documents overviewed in search for Polish SDGs included, among others, European Union Sustainable Development Strategy, Europe 2020, which is a strategy for smart, sustainable and inclusive growth, as well as Lisbon Strategy. And whereas the Polish strategic documents from which Polish SDGs were finally selected included long-term national development strategy, determining major challenges and the concept for the development of the country in the long term until 2030, midterm national development strategy, defining strategic objectives for the development of the country until 2020, and the system of 9 integrated strategies assisting in achieving these strategic documents. The abbreviation of these strategies you can see on the slide, and the full information you will find in the file uploaded later on the EMOS website. Furthermore, Polish SDGs identified in the discussed strategic documents were also structured around the 10 themes which at that time served as indicator framework for European Union Sustainable Development Strategy that was mentioned in the previous part. So I'll move on. Once the Polish SDGs had been identified, it was possible to select appropriate indicators to monitor them, and the criteria applied in selecting these indicators were the following: presence on the list of EU of indicators monitoring European Union Sustainable Development Strategy, international comparability, data availability, reliability of data source. Besides, Polish SDIs had to comply with strict correctness requirements, and to name but a few, they had to exhibit a substantive link with analyzed phenomenon of sustainable development, and they had to be formally correct. So they had to possess clear methodology, high quality and comparable data. As soon as indicators were selected, it was decided to group them into 4 thematic domains. Social domain, referring to improvement of the quality of life. Economic domain, related to socially sensitive economic growth. Environmental domain, including challenges connected with the protection and rational shaping of natural environment, and institutional political domain, defining challenges of global partnership and good governance. Still, apart from the domains that I've just mentioned, there is one more domain in Polish set, which is in fact not physically present there. It is symbolized by the picture in the middle of the slide, the 4 arrows meeting at the center, and it is called integrated domain. And I have another question for you connected with this picture with integrated domain. So, judging by what you've already heard and what you already know about sustainable development, what do you think integrated domain in the Polish set is all about? I'd appreciate your answers in the chat pod. So I'll keep quiet for a while and waiting for your answers. I can see that someone is typing. Interactions between the domains and overlaps. Precisely. So integrated domain is the target ultimate manifestation of sustainable development, which results from what Helen has just written down, namely from coherent, not contradictory, simultaneous creation of social, economic, environmental, and institutional and political domains. Therefore, as early as in the SDI selection stage, the project team working on the Polish SDI tried to integrate the domains by choosing indicators that could monitor more than one domain. So you could call it a kind of a multi-domain or multi-purpose approach. And now, last but not least, the smallest building block of conceptual framework for monitoring sustainable development in Poland, areas. So areas were distinguished from the 10 themes within 4 domains. There are 25 areas at the moment in the Polish SDI set, and they are monitored by 101 sustainable development indicators. Just to give you an example, in the social domain that you can see on the slide, there are 7 areas monitored by 31 indicators, each area having its representative or so-called headline or key indicator, and all the information on the other areas and on the names of the indicators monitoring them you will find in the file uploaded after the webinar, as there is no time to go into details. And on the slide in front of you, you can see the figure which somehow recapitulates what I've already said, namely the key in the whole system for monitoring sustainable development in Poland is integrated domain. Integrated domain is based on the system of strategic goals, which themselves are grouped into social, economic, environmental, and institutional domains. And the achievement of these goals, thematic domains, and in the long run, integrated domain, is monitored by appropriate sustainable development indicators. However, the starting point for the whole system for monitoring sustainable development in Poland lies elsewhere. Namely, it lies in sustainable development principles, which act as a filter for selecting Polish SD goals and then indicators in the end. So my question to you concerning the key principle in Polish is concerned with the key principle for Polish SDI set and in general for sustainable development in general. So what do you think? What is it? So in order to give you a hint, it was already quoted in the previous section, and it comes from the report called Our Common Future. So if you have any ideas, please share them in the chat pod. I think that someone is typing the answer. Or not. So perhaps I'll help you. So the key principle in Polish set and also in sustainable development in general is that of intra and intergenerational equity. And it says that development is sustainable only when it meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So as a result of applying the discussed conceptual framework, the project team finally determined a national set of sustainable development indicators in 2011. Then it consisted of 77 indicators grouped into domains and areas. However, the work over the set wasn't finished. In 2015, it was thoroughly revised and enriched with 40 new indicators, and it consisted then of 101 indicators. So that's the set before the agenda. And now let's move on to the set after the agenda. So the adoption of the 2030 agenda has brought about serious changes to the Polish SDI set. So agenda being universal, indivisible, and inclusive, calls for action by all countries. So Poland, in order to best implement the agenda and its 17 goals, adopted in 2017 a new development strategy consistent with the agenda. Both documents converge, which is noticeable in the shared objectives, areas, and actions. So there is not enough time to go into detail. However, the adoption of agenda and new Polish document to monitor development of the country strategy for responsible development, simply necessitated changes in the set concerning the grouping method. So now the Polish SDI set is being adjusted to the SDG framework, and in the very near future, Polish indicators will be structured around 17 sustainable development goals. And this new set will serve as a basis for Poland's voluntary review this year in 2018 at the high-level political forum, where Poland will report on its progress towards 17 goals. So if there is no need to have a break for any questions.
Yes, maybe we just move on and then we at the end collect some questions. But I invite participants, if you have questions so far, just write them in the chat box and we'll attend to them at the end of the session.
Okay, so let's proceed to the final part of my presentation, SDI application, which is a strategy for disseminating indicators monitoring sustainable development in Poland. So the application was deployed in 2016 on the information portal of Statistics Poland. And in addition to the national set that I've just discussed, regional and local sets were made available at the same time. Indicators in these sets are also grouped into 4 domains and appropriate areas. And in response to the 2030 agenda, application released the 4th module in 2017, a global module with indicators coming from the official UN SDG list. At the moment, there are 169 indicators in that module with data for Poland. I guess it's high time that I showed you some basic features of the application. So yes. I suggest
the desktop share.
Yes, I'll use share my screen.
And the full screen for participants.
Okay, that's right. Fine. So there are many ways to access sustainable development indicators in the application. You can, for instance, use the menu bar, click.
Excuse me, I just wanted to say that participants can use the full screen in case it didn't turn on automatically. On top, you have an icon with 4 arrows. It says full screen so that you will be able to follow and see those small fonts as well. I apologize. I just wanted to point this out. Thank you, Monika. Please.
No problem. Thank you. So you can access clicking on the menu category called modules, and you can simply select the set you are interested in. Let me remind you, there are 4 sets in SDI application: global one, national, regional, and local. However, the easiest way to get access to the indicators is by predefined views representing 4 sets. Since I've been talking about national set, I click on the national module. You have to unfold the side menu, and as you can see, indicators are grouped thematically into domains. You can also choose them alphabetically. So if you are, for example, interested in social domain and interested in poverty and living conditions, and I think you are, judging by the questions in the previous session, you just have to click on poverty and living conditions area, and you will get access to the indicators monitoring that area. And the headline indicator for this area is people at risk of poverty or social exclusion. If you choose the indicator, you get a table with data values for that indicator. In most cases, data in national module are presented from 2004, which is the year of Poland's accession to the European Union. However, if they are available, in this case, they are not available, therefore they start with 2005. What is interesting and worth mentioning about national module, it is the fact that data in the module are presented also for other countries and for Europe as a whole. You can check that by clicking on the tab International Comparison, and then you'll get the table with data for all the countries. So the table is dynamic. By clicking on the magnifier icon, you can select the countries that you are interested in. Apart from tabular form of presentation, data are also presented on charts, line charts, and bar charts. So let's try to generate a line chart. So the default number of presented countries is 7. You can change that by using chart settings, and you can present up to 30 territorial units. The chart is dynamic. It generates depending on the data presented in the table. You can preview values on the chart by moving mouse cursor. You can also hide or again display certain data series by clicking on them in the legend. It is also possible to present data in this module on maps. You just have to click on the right column. There are 2 kinds of maps here. You can either have a diagram, which you have now, or you can have a choropleth map. And of course, you can choose the year of presentation, the number of classes, colors, and things like that. So I think that's it in a nutshell as far as the application is concerned. Now let's go back to the presentation for the last slide. Can we? Okay, thank you. And as a consequence of changes that are taking place in a Polish set of sustainable development indicators, the application being a tool for their dissemination is likewise adjusted. and it is adjusted obviously to SDG framework. And in the very near future, it will change, therefore, a name and a user interface. So stay tuned for the very near updates. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Monika. We will now go to some questions because we have already 3 at the moment. So first of all,
yes,
from your experience, which indicator was most difficult to implement or get data on?
So, well, as far, for example, as a global, because what comes to my mind is a global set, and I remember that we had trouble with collecting indicator concerning compliance with labor rights. We have found it on the site of Penn University, and which worked on the indicator in collaboration with International Labour Organization, and in that way we got the indicator. However, the lowest number of indicators has been found for goal 14, which is concerned with life underwater, and that was quite problematic. And we have only 10, I think, or indicators monitoring that goal, which is about 30% of what we should have found.
Okay. The next question is, which indicators are amenable to be disseminated on a monthly basis?
Well, well, in fact, it is, well, not our purpose. So by definition, indicators in our sets are, well, presented yearly. So we do not present monthly or quarterly results for indicators. Well, that's simply by definition.
Okay. Now the next question is, how is Poland's SDI set distributed by tires today?
So, well, I can tell you that out of 244 indicators in the global set, we have managed to find 100 and data for 169 indicators, and we have also well, made a kind of a distinction, because only 121 indicators out of these 169 indicators are original SDG indicators. So in case of the remaining 48 indicators, we have found some proxy indicators which were perhaps not one-to-one, but somehow, in our opinion, reflected the idea conveyed by the target they were monitoring.
Okay, more questions. How do you deal with the sample size problem? The more you disaggregate the data, for instance, for local data, then by gender and age, how do you deal with that? I guess so. The problem is with well, the sample size, yes, and maybe the disclosure also.
Well, so far we haven't had such a problem, because the sets that, well, I didn't have enough time to go into the details as far as, for example, local set of sustainable development indicators is concerned. So the grouping method in local and regional well, sets, where disaggregation is, of course, more complicated, So indicators in these sets are grouped into domains and areas. However, they are not the same. So the definitions for them are not the same as, for example, in the national level. So they often come from administrative sources, for example, unemployment offices as far as labor market is concerned, and administrative sources simply have data on such low levels of disaggregation, and this is how we deal with that problem. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
But one has to be then very careful about incomparability in a way between the national and local level.
So, in fact, yes. Well, one have to pay attention to the definition and methodology of the indicators. However, on the local level, they are comparable when you take into account local territorial units.
Okay, and one more question, then I think we'll have to wrap up. Which indicators about housing is most difficult to implement?
Housing, you say? So, well, luckily, I don't think we've had such a problem as far as national set is concerned. We've got such indicators concerning housing as number of completed dwellings per 1,000 inhabitants. So so far we haven't, as far as national set is concerned, we haven't been interested in housing, for example, in the context of poverty, rather, in the context of so we don't have such a problem, simply.
Okay, well, that happens as well. Okay, at the moment I see no question, so I will say thank you so much to both presenters. I liked both presentations, and I was more in the beginner group, so I learned many things new. And many thanks to all our participants who joined us today from so many different places. If you wish to download the presentation, please stay with us for another minute or so. And in the meantime, I'd kindly ask you to check your inbox for a link to a very short survey about today's webinar. So we really appreciate your feedback and try to further improve our webinars as we go on each time. The next webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, 21st of March, so a little bit of a break, when Pete Das and Marco Putz from Statistics Netherlands will be presenting big data methods and techniques. Registration for this webinar will be open very soon. Now we'll leave the room open for another 10 minutes or so. We'll now publish the link to the recording by the end of the week at the latest, as usual on our website for webinars. Thank you for now and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye to Luxembourg and bye-bye to Poland.
Bye-bye.